Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again. And today's episode of Cracker, we were joined by Dr. Tracey Leghorn, who's the Chief Human Resources and Health and Safety Officer for Suez. And we put Tracey's fortune telling to the test in this one. So we actually recorded this as one of our first episodes back when coronavirus had first started to make its way around the globe. And suffice to say, a lot of Tracey's predictions, which are 18 months, 24 months old now, are now starting to come into fruition. So we set the episode up to talk about the psychology of transformational change. And Tracey's got some really interesting insights around the art of conquering new challenges in unknown environments, the approach to organizational change, the concept of systems thinking when going through that process, and also how do you prepare your people for organizational change. But what was really interesting is Tracey's view, even in those early stages, on the impact of remote working and how that might affect gender balance within organizations.
Yeah, we went deep dive into diversity and inclusion and we, how does gender role balance at home impact the whole working from home? How does that impact career success for women, for instance? And this is still a topic people are just scratching the surface of in the workplace. It's so exciting to cover it at such an early stage and see that the insights from Tracey were so far ahead of the time.
So let's know what you think. Was Tracey on the money? Let us know, but like and subscribe, follow us on all the socials, and hope you enjoy the episode. So thank you so much for joining us. For today's episode, we've got the prestigious Dr. Tracey Leghorn. Tracey, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I know that your diary is very busy at the moment, so really glad to get an hour of your time to talk to you. For our followers and our listeners listening to the show, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tracey, and I am currently the Chief HR and Health and Safety Officer at Suez Recycling and Recovery UK. Board level exec, and I'm also on the HR executive committee for the group at Suez that operates out of headquarters in Paris. I'm also a mum and a grandmother that I'm very proud of as well.
Keeping you busy then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I had one of my kids join me on a podcast the other day. That was quite interesting. Just turned up next to me asking for my phone, of all things. I was like, oh, hello. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Tracey. And you spent some time in the NHS as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I started my career actually not in HR. I worked in media for a local newspaper and in retail. But then I got interested in HR. The only opportunity that I could find at the time, if I'm honest, was in the NHS. I'd taken quite a big step back from where I was to step into HR. And, we'll always be grateful for the NHS for giving me that opportunity. And it did lead to, other opportunities and progression in the NHS. I've pretty much worked in every type of NHS trust there can be. Acute trust, mental health, community, in a primary care trust when they were the commissioners of NHS services. But I ended my NHS career with 9 years in the ambulance service.
Wow.
Yes.
Amazing.
Would it be fair to say then you've got a bit of a vested interest in well-being?
Absolutely. And actually, if you cut me in half, I'll always be green and part of the ambulance service family. And I know the NHS and my colleagues in the ambulance service have obviously had the most intense year possible.
Yeah.
But that experience has really helped me really at Suez, because I spent a lot of time planning for pandemics in my 9 years at the ambulance service.
Wow.
So, yes, very much proud of my background there. But not wanting to, stay in the same sector forever. I took the step out of the NHS and into the private sector after that. So it'd be about 7 years ago now. Stepped into Compass Group in their healthcare sector, but not providing any healthcare. In fact, they were pretty terrified of letting any of our cleaners, porters or facilities workers go near a patient. And that felt quite alien. But instead we provided catering, soft FM and portering services into hospitals. And I was fortunate because the opportunity really came along my path. I didn't apply for the job, but they were looking for someone who could understand and talk the language of healthcare, but, providing different services. So it was like the universe sent it me, really.
It sounds a bit that way. It's like a destiny that you fulfilled by the sounds of it.
Well, I think a lot of people get very precious about having, experience in the business or the industry or the sector where you're going to work. And I am completely the opposite. And, I think I'm living proof that you can move between sectors. I didn't know anything about catering and hospitality sectors when I joined Compass Group. And when I joined Suez Group, I knew absolutely nothing about waste and resources. And I'm quite ashamed of the fact that I didn't even probably do enough recycling myself or understand what bin waste should go in. And now, I'm trying to save the planet and I get really defensive about it when people don't do the right thing.
I saw a great post the other day talking about, the difference between work ethic and experience and knowledge versus ambition and stuff. And it certainly rings true to me. Like, experience is vital, but if you're going into a new arena and you haven't got the desire to, progress and that you don't work hard, then you're not going to make it anywhere in there, really, in my opinion. But obviously you've pivoted lots of different areas, haven't you? Has that been difficult to do, or have you been, entirely motivated to get on in that particular arena? So, you've powered through.
I think I've been motivated to prove people wrong. As soon as someone says it's too hard to do or you can't do it,
fires you up, does it?
Absolutely.
Love that.
Up for the challenge.
Love that. Yeah.
Absolutely up for the challenge. But actually, it is something that you can get better at, and I think it's a real skill. Certainly, when I stepped into PwC, I went there after Compass Group, but before Suez. As a consultant, you're dropped into every type of environment. You're absolutely out of your comfort zone most of the time, coping with a bit of, faking it, till you got yourself up and running. And, you develop the ability to be able to be thrown into any situation and navigate your way around. And that's a really good skill to have. So, at PwC, I got insight into so many different industries without having to change jobs. I mean, it was fantastic. I went from defence organisations to a large bank down at Canary Wharf, up to the Northwest in a big pharmaceuticals organisation, all of which are industries that I really didn't know anything about either. So, stepping into Suez, it wasn't as hard as it would have been because I'd learned how to quickly orientate myself, build relationships and navigate my way around things.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So obviously, in my role, I get to speak to a number of, different organizations and end up, talking to many different people about different challenges. So it's never that same, context that you're going into. You're always kind of going in cold and thinking, right, okay, what's the situation? How do we need to deal with it? And you're right. When you first start off, it's quite difficult to know kind of where to start. But I guess after a while, typically, okay, look, let's just have a reset. This is point one, right? This is what the first thing we need to do is this. And then you've kind of got your notional path, haven't you, that you can follow to then, as you say, start to build the connections, orientate yourself around the business and, start to kind of get under the hood, so to speak.
I do think some businesses miss out on talent by being too defined about that situation. I'm not saying that having industry experience or having some history with the organisation you're in isn't valuable. Every team needs that mix. But actually, coming into things with a really fresh set of eyes and asking silly questions that actually lead people to challenge, well, actually, why have we always been doing it this way?
Yeah.
Can be really helpful. And as a leader and someone who loves to develop their teams and people, I like to, help my team get out of their comfort zone, put them in different situations to see how they can respond. And you're there to support them. They know you're going to catch them if they're going to fall. You know instinctively that they're not. Sometimes it's just a case of confidence. And then the more you do that with them, the better. I remember, and he probably won't mind me telling you, one of my key talents at Suez, at the start of the pandemic, I said, right, I need you to help me and step into the well-being space. This is really important. And, it's a bit like a deer in the headlights. Well, I don't know anything about well-being. I said, well, by the time we've done a bit of it, you'll be an expert. And what a phenomenal job he has done for me at Suez in that space. And, now moved him along to do something else. That confidence and that development beyond what you would normally do in your day job is just absolutely so valuable to future career progression.
I honestly couldn't agree more. I think where, I've seen a number of different leaders, in my roles kind of throughout the years coming into organizations, and the ones that personally I think are most valuable or have had the biggest impact are the ones that have come in externally with, to your point, a completely fresh view, right? Because if there's absolutely nothing wrong with, working the way up the ladder and coming in, from within the organization. However, I think there is a point where bringing the outside in, as they say, has a huge amount of value, because a lot of, the content that Jack and I talk about is just asking why, and if you've done the same thing for 10, 15 years, and chances are it will probably continue to happen unless there's, a particular trigger point where, you decide that you have to pivot. But someone coming in fresh that's just trying to understand what the bloody hell's going on is going to say, well, why are we doing that? And more often than not, the answer is, I don't know. We've always done it that way. It's like, well, okay, well, we can change that, and what we're doing over here, and it creates that, kind of inertia for change, doesn't it? I think once you've got that kind of fresh perspective coming into the organisation.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing quite a bit of transformation at Suez. To set the context, 10 years or so ago, 95% of waste went into landfill. Thousands of lorries into landfill sites every day. The UK had one or maybe more of the biggest landfill sites in Europe. 10 years on, and the vision of creating a world where there is no more waste and that waste is seen as a resource, we're putting less than 5% into landfill. And actually the rest we're really doing good stuff with. We're taking it out, we're reusing it, we're recycling it, and where we can't, we're creating energy from it. So that's a major sort of transformation within our industry and within our company in the UK, through the vision of the chief exec who was with us at the time. And moving forward now, there's a massive transformation ahead of us coming out of the waste and resources strategy from the government it's just probably heading for 2 years ago now that we're working on. But then also within the organisation, we do a lot of lean in our processing facilities, but also want to build on that to look at systems thinking. Systems thinking, when I say that, it isn't about IT. It's about looking at the organisation as a whole system and the processes that operate in that system and actually making them work better. And one of the things that I do when I set up the sessions around looking at this is I say, start asking why. Don't sit back and, be quiet when conversations or things are happening and feel impotent really in the situation to change things. When children are little, they have that stage where they really annoy us, don't they? Why, mummy? Why?
Just when they're little.
Why, mummy? Why, mummy?
Tell me when it stops.
Life conditions them out of asking why. And by the time we're adults, we're not challenging what's happening and why it's happening. And you've got to create that in your people and get that energy around that again and empower them to make changes. And it can have huge, huge effects. Some of the processes that we've looked at, even, across our business, from our customer wanting to purchase a collection of their waste through to us billing them and dealing with any queries. We looked at that and the steps within it and found, over 50% of the activities in there were waste that we didn't need to be doing, that we could turn off or change or do in a different way. And that frees up your time to concentrate on activities that are value added.
Yeah, I mean, so many people don't know the extent of that wastage either, do they? And I think the point you made early on around individuals and giving them variety for me is massive, because everyone works in different ways. People have different attention spans, learning styles, and if you give them a script to say this is how we do things, whether they're a consultant like in your previous role or they're working, for you in HR currently, everyone's different, and you need a bit of variety in terms of diversity in people to make things progress forward. I think personally I work in very different ways to colleagues. I like to sort of be thrown in the deep end rather than to script stuff and run through things, because I'm focusing far too much on something which I need to be over here kind of thing. But also hearing you talk about transformation is really interesting for me. And there's lots of businesses at the moment that are coming from a world where they might have had plans for transformation and they've been completely scrapped, or they're having to reactively make a transformation in their business because of either the pandemic, the financial impact of the pandemic, or because of changes, as a result of it. What's your opinion in how businesses can approach transformation? Either, kind of Christmas Carol, right? Before, during, after, past, present, future. How do they approach it in an efficient way?
I think firstly, transformation doesn't have a start and an end point. It's an evolution. Sometimes we need a bit of a revolution. We might be in dire straits or financial issues or really, sort of lacking in performance. And you need to do something more urgent to address the situation, maybe a turnaround situation. But generally speaking, transformation should evolve from where you are and continue endlessly. I think, lots of discussions around round tables on this. And I passionately believe that if you don't take the time at the start of that next phase of transformation to be very clear on what the scope of that transformation is, what you're actually trying to get out of it, you end up 6 months, 12 months down the line, and no one thinks they achieved what that transformation was for. And that's because you didn't have that clarity right at the beginning. And the situation that we're in at the moment around the pandemic, could intensify that situation in that people feel we need to act now, and certainly the pace of change has increased, hasn't it? But actually, you've got to be very disciplined to say, just stop, pause, have a proper, thorough, constructive conversation about this. And certainly at board level, be absolutely clear on what the definition of that transformation is and what it is you're trying to get out of it. When we started our transformation piece around systems thinking, I'll be honest, it took us nearly 3 months to nail down that conversation.
Right.
But it did mean that then when we did move into the transformation, everything we did was within that scope. So it wasn't wasted time, wasn't wasted energy, and there was absolute clarity on the message. It's one of those, speculate to accumulate situations, really. Spend that time up front, and then when you get into implementation, it just naturally happens,
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking about 3 months, which may seem like a lot of time, but if that's going to future-proof something for 10 years, 20 years, that's a drop in the ocean, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Lots of businesses get too sort of anxious about, right, we need to get something going. We just need to start. And now we're started, we're okay, but they're not challenging the norm. And I guess those boardroom conversations can be really difficult, right? Because you've got a lot of people who have a lot of ideas, who are running the show. And when you disagree, it might result in a bit of a longer time added to that conversation.
Well, I remember going down to Essex University at one point. There was a HR director's job going there, and I was sat waiting, going in for an interview, and I looked at their perspective. And it said something along the lines, join us if you like a good argument. And I was like, oh,
Love
you know
that.
what? Maybe this is right for me, because I like a good constructive debate.
Oh, no, you don't.
We should be encouraging it and feeling safe to have that constructive challenge. And certainly at board level, that's really important. But, you know, spending that time to come to a collegiate view, and also it wasn't that we weren't agreeing, it's just that we found it very hard to define it. We literally did debate every single word in that scope. But it did mean that when we went out then to our teams to ask them to get on board with this, we were all given exactly the same message. I think the second step where people fall down is they don't prepare the organisation or its people for change.
Yeah.
You know, we go, this is what we need, this is the golden answer, right? Everyone is bound to be on board and think it's as great an idea as we do. No, they don't, actually. So you've got to be prepared then to just invest a little bit of time getting people on board, opening their minds up to change. And as part of our transformation piece, I created just an approach and a model to help work through in a session, you know, how you could get to trust in that space in order to really critique what you've been doing in your own job and critique all our processes, you know, to the point where, you know, people are leaving their ego at the door and actually letting go of the fact that, you know, if I say 4 or 5 steps in this process that I do are waste, and I'm talking in lean terms here.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what happens to me? Because that's a third of my job gone.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to be able to let people let that go and say, do you know what? Your job's still going to be here. It might be different. You might be doing different things. And actually, you might feel it's more valuable because everything that you're doing is of value, rather than at the moment, some things that you've been doing, probably because we needed them doing before, actually don't add value, and certainly don't add value for our customer.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's such a huge piece as well, because with those processes, you know, and those that let's say have an unbalanced ratio of waste versus value in them, chances are they're owned by someone, right? And they have been for quite a long time, and you know that does make, you know, they are the makeup of that particular job profile or that particular function. And you know, I guess it makes total sense to say, look, this isn't about, you know, making that your particular function redundant. It's about making that particular function more effective. And, you know, by removing these, you know, we're going to be able to kind of, you know, point you in this direction, and you're going to be able to kind of add more value to the organization by doing so. But I don't know, like, how do you get people bought into that? Because, you know, if I was in that position and someone was saying, you know, you've got let's just say 50% of your role, actually we kind of don't really need you to do that anymore, but don't worry, you know, we've kind of got this other kind of value add stuff that you can do. I feel like I would still be in a point of uncertainty in a way, and like you really do need, I think the word that you used just now was kind of trust, right? When you're in those sessions and building that trust and getting people on board with, you know, with exactly what's happening. Like how do you get to that point in tactical terms, like to get them on board so far as they're willing to, let's say, concede that some of those processes that they're operating with are waste, and that actually, you know, have faith that the role is going to change for something positive rather than, you know, be potentially redundant within the organisation?
Yeah, because organisations often want to move forward at pace. They think about the technology, you know, the IT. They think about the cost of the project and keeping that on course, but they forget about people and the psychology of it. And that's where the biggest benefits can come from. I, you know, created a session to help people understand change, understand how they feel when they go through change, but then actually within those working groups, working on these activities and looking to refine our processes to create, as I say, this environment of trust. And I look at it as a bit like it's a triangle, and trust is sat at the top. And in the middle, there's 3 rows, and in the middle row, we've got 3 triangles that fit in there. Mm. And based on my experience of, undertaking large transformational change, which I've really sort of got a bit of a reputation for from my career, I think it's not a good luck or good management. It's just wherever I went, they needed something big doing. I sat and I thought, well, what are the key things that make a transformation program successful with regards to that people piece? What are the behaviors I need people to demonstrate to help me just let go of that self-interest and think about the organization?
Exactly.
There was sort of 3 for me. One is about being bold. Step beyond your boundaries. Think beyond the reasonable. Blue sky thinking. Be really brave and courageous about that. And don't be put off by other people, The second thing really is around breaking down barriers or working across boundaries. You've got to, when you're looking at processes, you've got to look from end to end. And there might be lots of different functions or departments in the organisation that do part of that process. And then you have to understand the handoffs around that. So you've got to work beyond your own job, your own team, and into the wider organisation. And that's why I promote networking, as being a really positive thing inside and outside the organisation. So we've got to work across boundaries. And the third thing is about believe. And I don't mean here, believe what I'm saying as a leader, that this is the best thing since sliced bread. No, believe in yourself. Believe that you've got some of the answers, that you can contribute something valuable to what we're trying to achieve. And once you believe in it, help other people get on board. And those, I think, if we can nail those 3 things. But in any relationship, you can't just ask for something. It has to be reciprocal. So what is it that the people in the room need from us as leaders and people on the project in order to be able to be bold, work across boundaries and believe in themselves? And I asked them to do an exercise to think about what they need. And then as a room, we pick the 5 that fit in the bottom tier of the triangle. And they are, they can be quite different, but there's often some themes around, be honest with us. If this is really about cost cutting rather than creating capacity, tell me now. Be open. If we say we can change, promise that you're going to give us the funding that we need to make the changes that we want.
Yeah.
And that then really enters you into a contract, a psychological contract in that room that people then can go forward from. And I run that exercise at the start of any change session with people who are new to the process. And it does work. And it's amazing how, when people, get their Post-its out and map out their processes and then go, we used to send that report to 10 different places. Why do we send it? No one ever reads it. Actually, they get really quite excited about the fact that, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I'm not going to be doing that anymore. And actually, that means we can create some capacity for our people to not be like hamsters on a wheel trying to get the job done every day, but to find pauses in the day to think about, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How's my team doing things? And are we doing them most effectively?
Yeah, that insight is absolutely brilliant. And it goes back to your comments as well around the change, the perception of change and the personal feelings about it. And if you're communicating things to employees and saying consultation, risk and stuff like that, and not saying it in the tone that you would normally talk to them, then it's going to put people's backs up, isn't it? Whereas if you're making a change for the positive, and yes, there's going to be amendments to parts of people's roles, but actually the overall strategy is here and the feeling of positive changes under that, then you're right, it's a complete mindset shift, isn't it? You've got to bring people along on the journey to let them understand that you're doing this for the good, and it's going to put us in great stead for the future. I remember when organizations were first doing things like gender pay gap reporting, and they were looking internally at roles, and they were looking at the splits between board level people, genders, and then all the way through the company, and how that worked. And then they reported their figures, and then lots of organizations didn't provide like a explanation as to what has occurred. It was just, here's the numbers because we've got to do this, and we're not going to talk about why we might have an issue or what we're trying to do about the issue. And it's the same for that change management for me. It's like, well, we're coming from a place where we've identified an issue. Here's what we're doing to solve it with you, and we need you to be on board. And hopefully at the end of it, we can demonstrate what we've changed. But I know that so many organizations miss the end bit. And, just thinking about the gender equality thing, it's so topical, and, diversity and inclusion is such a topical issue, but so many organizations don't even identify the issue they've got, let alone talk about how to solve it. They just jump straight into this. We've got to put some external information out, and that's it. We'll draw the line at that.
Yeah. I think this challenge as well, isn't it? It's not defining what the outcome is, which leads back to all of that previous conversation. Like, we got to do something because everyone else is doing it, and and it's something that we kind of have to tick the box with immediately. But to your point, Tracey, almost like slow down to speed up. Like, if we just take our time for a minute, whatever we do implement is going to have the right impact, and it's going to have the right cadence as well, and it's gonna, it's really going to add maximum value, right?
There's a couple of things that I'd add really, and one is you've got to be absolutely honest. And I have been in situations, and when I was in the ambulance service, I was often called to go into other NHS trusts that were in crisis situations, turnaround situations. And, it was about actually reducing costs. And you've just got to be honest up front and say, we cannot afford the services that we're delivering at the moment. And, there are going to be changes, and there are going to be headcount reductions from this.
Yeah.
People, they know it anyway. So, have integrity and be honest. For us, in our approach to systems thinking transformation at Suez, we were in a very sound financial situation, and it wasn't about headcount reduction. It was quite alien to me because often in my career it has been. It was about building capacity in roles so that we could grow without additional costs, which we did. We won one of the biggest waste resources contracts in Europe and mobilised that from a HR point of view with very little, if any, additional resource because we found some headroom. So, that was very positive. I think the other thing is, I have to admit to not being someone who reads lots of leadership books. I've just spent 14 years studying for various things, and once I finished, I thought, that's it. I don't want to read another.
No more books.
I was looking at your bookshelf behind just to see if I could see any titles on there. But it looks like it's a lot of work in folders, but not so many, not so much book for reading.
No, I'm not a reader.
Me neither.
Leadership books. But I do remember one quote, and it's always stuck with me for decades, and it's by Evans, and he's in his book from 96, and he said, "It's human nature to resist unless you've been part of creating it." And if you have that in mind when you are looking to implement any change at all, you will be successful. And actually, for us, it wasn't about we know the golden answer. We knew what we wanted to address, the issue, but actually we went out to our people and we said, tell us what the answer is. And actually we started the program with a 5-week sprint with probably 50 people taken off their day jobs at all levels of the organisation who are working on various parts of that process, probably at least another 50, maybe 70 back on their sites who we engage with. And we said, right, over to you. We gave them some structure, and we gave them some project management support, and we gave them some facilitation, and we helped them about how you process map, because many of them had never done it before. And actually, the answers are always in your people. The answers don't have to be sat at the top. They're not. They're down at the grassroots. They know where the issues are. They know where the frustrations are. And all they're asking of leaders is please free us up from all these frustrations, because we actually want to do the right thing. We certainly want to do the right thing by our customer. So, our job really is to provide that environment for our people to do that.
I think that's such a powerful anecdote, with that quote, and it's almost, change isn't something that you do to your people, it's something that you do with your people, right?
Yeah.
And if they are on board with the journey, then like it just makes so much sense. Like there's going to be less friction, that everyone's part of the journey, they're co-creating it, rather than it being something that's imposed upon them. It's something that they are kind of creating within the organization. So I think that is actually a very powerful anecdote to kind of take away on change. And I think on that point, probably one of the biggest changes, and I'm kind of keen to get your opinion on this, Tracey, is one of the biggest changes that organizations are going through right now is clearly this kind of shift to remote working and how we facilitate that as an organization. But also, we're not just talking getting people bloody laptops and mobile phones. Like, we're talking about what does this mean in terms of our culture, our diversity and inclusion. What impact does that have? And I know that when we had a conversation before, we were suggesting that potentially there could be like an underlying impact with remote working on things like gender equality, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all still new to us. I think that's really important. We've had the world of work for decades, but we've only worked in the way that we are at the moment for about 10 months. So we shouldn't think that this 10 months actually is, right for the whole of the future. I think it's really exciting that it's brought about some change. It's brought about why did we used to do it that way? Because actually we can manage to do it in this different way. We have, all of us, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, had to prioritise and turned lots of things off. The question is, do we need to turn those activities back on? Were they, value added activities? And then, there's the whole question of, where should work be done? And to me, it is about agility. And being an agile organisation goes beyond, the cliche of flexible working. Being an agile organisation is freeing yourself from, all the bureaucracy, opening up those boundaries, working across boundaries. And I think we'll see in the future more organisations that are more balanced matrix, project, task-orientated organisations, rather than hierarchies of particular job descriptions of people doing specific tasks. We'll move to role profiles that suggest what types of activities or tasks you might be apt to do around your sort of expertise, but, are not dictating it in the way that they used to.
Yeah.
And, where the work gets done, might change as well. I think a lot of the conversation has been about, is it office or home working? And we sometimes forget that the majority of people in this country have to do the job where they're doing it. Our refuse collectors need to be out on the streets.
They can't work from home.
That way. Yeah. They need to be in our processing facilities or our energy from waste sites. So we mustn't forget that when we're having the whole conversation. And for us at Suez, we need to be mindful that we don't want to divide between, people who can predominantly work at home and people who have no choice to do that at all. In fact, our culture is built on the fact that we try to integrate people. We like our support services staff to get out to our sites, to meet people, to see what's done on those sites. And so, we would want that moving forward. From a sort of women and work perspective, and it's a subject that I've been passionate about now for, 25 years and done research around for 25 years. I have some hesitancy around perhaps people thinking that, being able to work from home is the panacea to women's emancipation and progress in the workplace. I think it has huge opportunities, but it also might have some downsides. when women come to make decisions around their work life, it isn't just about where the work gets done. It's much more dynamic than that. And my doctorate research was actually about looking at this very thing. And, my model that explains the dynamics of how women make their choices around work and motherhood, that is one factor in it, and quite a big one, being able to facilitate caring for their children as well. But it really isn't everything. And, my concern is that if we get to a position where people are given free choice, then, and I, make no apology for being perhaps stereotyping, but more women will likely choose to work from home so that they can fit that childcare arrangements around that. And men might be more inclined, not all of them, but men might be more inclined to be present in the workplace. And the reality is that could take us back a few decades of progress, because what we found and what we're seeing now from the evidence from the research is that women are doing more of the childcare than they were previously. So that takes us back a step rather than heading towards the 50-50 father, mother, or same-sex partners share in that child rearing situation. Also, the evidence is saying that more women have been impacted by the pandemic, more women have lost their jobs through the pandemic. And some interesting research by a colleague of Professor Henrietta O'Connor at the University of Leicester. She was my supervisor for my doctorate, and we did a round table a couple of weeks ago. And one of her colleagues had been doing some research, and actually in 1981, only 1% of people, did a significant amount of work at home. When we headed just before the pandemic, that had only increased to 4.6 or 4.8%, certainly less than 5%. And then overnight, we hit a point where it was at the more 45, 46%. But those were predominantly roles that can be done at home, roles that are support services, like HR roles, which, are predominantly female orientated roles, etc. So we've got to be careful that as we move forward, women make informed decisions about what's right for them, and not find out in 10 or 15 years' time, when their children are grown up, that actually they didn't make the right choice with regards to career progression. Because, I'm a real advocate of networking for career progression, networking to learn. And if you're in the workplace, as we're walking into a meeting and we're discussing our day, or we're finding out someone's done a project somewhere else, you can say, oh, do you know, I'd be really interested in doing that. If you're in a hybrid situation where some people are in the workplace and having those types of conversations before the meeting starts, and not trying to exclude you, it's just human nature to talk about things when you're together.
Yeah.
And then you're at home and you're only dialed in at the start of a meeting, and then you dial out at the end. Where are you getting those informal interactions about what's going on in the business? So I don't think the problem's insurmountable, but we as businesses and organisations and leaders and HR directors and chief HR officers need to be consciously doing something to make sure that we can ensure that those opportunities do arise. One of the things that we talked about previously was my new Friday forums that we've introduced at Suez, and our chief executive John and I were talking about how can we create these informal situations, because we could cope for a few months with perhaps less interaction, but as time's gone on in the second lockdown, what can we do from a well-being, but also from a cultural perspective? And John was very passionate about doing something in this area.
Yeah.
So we've introduced our Friday forums, and it's more about informal discussion than it is about business. And they're proving, to be going down really well. And I join one every week. And actually, it's interesting that even in the first one, someone was talking about a project that they were proud of in the week. And someone else went, oh, I did something around that. We should be having a chat because, we can see how we can work on those things together. And, for me, it was, this is exactly why
Love it.
We wanted to do this, to connect people.
An amazing insight. So I've got about 30 things to say. The stuff you said was incredible. But the first thing that springs to mind is obviously not just the insight you brought on the gender equality piece, the working from home piece, but obviously your background and the research that you've done puts real meat to those bones, right? It's not just I think this or I feel this. You've trodden a path on that. And I just want to go a little bit deeper into that, because obviously there's a lot of misconceptions or stereotypes around, women taking the career break to have children, women coming back part-time or not at all, or doing more childcare, and the assumption that the male works, the female looks after the children. But you also mentioned there that actually women are doing more childcare than ever right now. Did you mean right now because of pandemic, or did you mean in the current sort of last couple of years kind of thing?
So, there was starting to be a little bit of a journey from the 80s onwards where, men were starting to contribute more in the raising of their children. So, when feminism came in, they knew that they couldn't attack men and say, you're all bad, you're all not helping, you've got to do your part. They knew that would create a closed door. Think about evidence, So instead, they created the concept back in the 60s of the fact that children have two parents. And they tried to start a story and change around the ideologies, the previous ideologies that said that actually children should be looked after by their mother full time. And actually, children would be harmed if they weren't looked after full time by their mothers. And actually, even more so, if you're a mother and you're not gaining your every fulfillment from just being a mother, there's something wrong with you. And that's what the ideologies back in the 60s were talking about. It feels a bit unreal now. I always compare it to, the days when we thought the planet was flat.
Yeah, some people still do.
But at the time that those ideologies were being talked about, it was akin to the days when people thought the planet was flat and you would fall off the end of it, like we learned at school. So it's very different from that. And from the 80s onwards, and we're getting into the 20s, there's starting to be more men wanting to take a more active part in raising their children. And actually, an approach that's about, or a theory that started around 50-50 child rearing. And in the research I did for my doctorate, the women who were being successful at having a career and balancing that with motherhood had achieved that with their partners in the home. And that, was one of the big reasons why they could have a career. And so that was really starting to happen. And actually more men were starting to ask for part-time work than women. And the evidence is there in the national statistics to say that. But unfortunately, during the pandemic, that debate in the house about who's got the most important job, whose call is more important or meeting is more important, has come back to the fore. And unfortunately, and this isn't me just saying it, this is evidenced, women are actually taking back more of that responsibility. And so we've got to be careful that we're not turning the clock back the wrong way, turning that dial back the wrong way. Now, my blog this month actually does focus on men and actually says, this might be a period where men, having been at home more with their family, think, well, do you know what? I don't want to be away 3 nights a week. I don't want to be getting home when my children are in bed. And so, there are positives on both sides of that gender discussion. What we've got to make sure we're doing is I think in the early stages of the pandemic, there was so much out there on social media about how this was fantastic, how it was going to women's emancipation, they could do any job from anywhere. And I was sitting there thinking, we've got to make sure this conversation actually is a bit more rounded. And so I'm trying to do that and to start that conversation, with some people who are keen to have it with me and progress that. So, it's just about making informed decisions.
Yeah. I mean, like, totally, like, you can probably tell by my face, I'm kind of leaning closer and closer into the mic.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Sorry.
Yeah, Jack was like, oh my God. But no, I honestly, I find that so fascinating. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the kind of longer term impacts of, kind of what was, created, back in the bad old days, and kind of how that's still manifesting itself now. And I know that when we've had conversations around other topics around things like racism in the workplace, we spoke about the concept of generational trauma, where whilst it might not be as prevalent now, the trauma of previous generations has kind of been passed down, and it is just kind of bred into our behaviour and our attitudes. And I kind of feel like it's it's a similar situation, right, with the kind of gender equality in terms of the cultural trauma of women staying at home, men earning the bread, so to speak, and having
one generation,
isn't it? Right, and having that dynamic. So, but then what I started to think about was, well, when you think about the way that companies are set up, right, for new parents, and if I take myself as an example, we kind of almost impose that cultural kind of approach to parenthood, because men, typically speaking anyway, and obviously this is changing, but typically the stance is you get 2 weeks paternity leave. And then obviously there's a number of different, probably more flexibility, but obviously we've got statutory maternity, and then, probably more flexibility now on longer term maternity leave. But when you think about it now in the context of your research, that you've gone through for your doctorate, I kind of feel like, well, actually it's right there in front of us. We are literally, embracing and enforcing that opposed dynamic to where we're trying to get to, because we haven't got the policies to support that balance right now. And I'm wondering if that's potentially something that, based on that, we're going to have to start to think about.
This comes back to why I said flexible working is not the panacea for everything for women, because we don't exist in a vacuum. The world is created by ideologies, by political viewpoints, by the policies of government, by the opinions of society, by the structure of work. Now, back in the day, when organisations were creating part-time work, and we could have a whole conversation, academic conversation about that, whether men created work part-time for women because they wanted them to be marginalised in those types of jobs, or whether part-time work was there to facilitate people's workplace environment. You could write a 5,000 word essay on. But the reality is that part-time work that perhaps helped women come into the workplace was work that was of lesser value than, other jobs. It was in certain sectors like care work, customer services. It wasn't in the types of jobs that pay more money, basically. And what I think we've got to be careful about, as women have been able to do more and more full-time jobs, and I'm not saying it's easy, I've been a working mum myself, it's hard. We must be very careful that we don't go into this working from home, working from office, and that duplicates the part-time working of the past, and that some jobs are suitable for doing at home and might become less well paid, and some jobs are suitable for being done in the workplace and might be jobs that have better career progression. So I don't think these, again, are things that are insurmountable, but they are things that we have to have our eyes open to as HR leaders and as organisations, to make sure that we act responsibly and address them. and I do feel very passionate. I do feel very passionate about it, but I am quite conscious that when I'm saying, look, flexible working isn't the be all and end all, it's perhaps not what some people want to hear.
Yeah, but do you know what? It's not like it isn't the be all and end all. The reality is the choice of flexible working is what matters, not the practice itself. And I think that's what, in my opinion, kind of creates the engagement and the employees' flexibility to be able to do that should they choose. You've got some companies that are going to, right, we're complete 100% remote now, and I just think no, it's not the way to do it. Like it's not the practice that adds the value; it's the choice. That employees can kind of take up if they want it, and I think it is. A much bigger conversation, right, around kind of circling back to the kind of diversity and inclusion and kind of the gender argument is a much bigger conversation, right? And we actually did a piece recently, and Jack, I'm going to ask you to jump in on this because I know that you were quite involved with it. But when you actually have a look at the policies, the structure, and the benefits, so to speak, as well within the organisation, and I talk about benefits because the link to kind of well-being and that being so prominent right now. There's quite a lot of inequalities actually in the structure of the benefits themselves as well, right, Jack? Depending on whether you're married, depending on whether you're single,
Absolutely.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, like there's a traditional concept in benefits that obviously the better a benefit is, the more funding it's got. So let's give people medical, and the best medical we could possibly give people is family funded, for everybody. But if you don't have a family, you're not getting that benefit. You're not getting the same level of funding and the same advantage, basically. If you gear up benefits or HR policies, terms and conditions towards a specific area like that, but you're not looking at everything else, that's where most companies fall short. And there's this amazing consulting concept that I use a lot called MECE, MECE, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So if you're trying to do something, especially strategize, you've got to try and break it down to all of its components and then address each component. So if you're looking at a room of people and you wanted to ask what gender are the people in the room, you would have male, female, and then potentially other categories depending on how we're addressing it. You wouldn't have male, female, 30 years old, British, etc. But people don't do that in the benefits world. They just go, right, exceptional benefits is more money at it, and we're missing groups of people in doing that. And I think that's a massive challenge. I also think it's a massive challenge in the mental health space because people just put in a solution to solve it. They go, right, we need to do something about mental health. Let's put an EAP in place, tick box, we're done. They're not looking at all the different elements of mental health or the different angles to support. And that's certainly become a huge issue that we've seen in the pandemic and lockdown, because people react different ways. Like I remember working from home days occasionally were fantastic for me because I could get my head down, clear a load of stuff, brilliant. But I'm more than willing to raise my hand and say working from home 5 days a week is no good for my mental health. I need to be with people. Yeah, exactly. I need to be with people, right? Yeah. And how do we go from this world where we're forcing people to work in an unnatural way? We know that we're never going to return to how we worked before. Apart certain roles hopefully will do, because if they're like you mentioned, if they're on a site 5 days a week or they're retail and stuff like that, then they can do. But I'm comfortable in also saying we're never going to stay like this forever as well. But how ongoing do we support people's mental health in a completely reactive world? Because we're trying to be proactively reactive. How do we support people's mental health better?
I think I'm very passionate about well-being, and probably comes from 14 years in the NHS, some time in social services in HR, and seeing the impact for instance of social deprivation on individuals. But 9 years in the ambulance service meant that I learned a lot about mental health and the impact of crisis and catastrophic situations on people. I also learned that some people's mental health can be impacted, and it doesn't need to be a catastrophic event that triggered it. Sometimes it can be a little thing. And for instance, paramedics might go years and go to some really challenging jobs that are a bit gruesome, etc. And be able to cope with that, but then turn up at a job where there's a little old lady who's been on the floor for 10 hours because there's no one there to pick her up. That actually leads to them having post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm. So it isn't about the event in itself. And so when the pandemic was starting off, I sat down with John, our chief exec, and I said, John, a couple of things that we need to think about here. Number one is, for the last 10 years or more, this organisation has been saying that people come first, health and safety is our first priority, above and beyond anything else, even finances. And you have been living that value, and I obviously am responsible for health and safety at board level. But as we move forward into, this pandemic and the rubber hits the road, and we think about what our people need, we need to make sure that we do the right thing, because whether this lasts a week or two, how naive we spoke in the early days, or more, people will never forget how we acted in this moment now. It won't ever be forget. You could undo decades of really fantastic work by doing the wrong thing right now. And he was absolutely, Tracey, our mantra has to be, we're going to do the right thing by our people. And, it's not easy, but we have really stuck to that. The second thing I was saying to him was, based on my experience around mental health, and I don't call myself an expert, but I've worked with experts, we need to do something now. We've created our Wellness for All charter in the autumn of 2019, and we created that, our people have created it, back to Evans. We got 50 people in a room and we said, right, write us our wellness charter, and we did, and our vision for that, and prioritise what's important in this organisation. And actually, even then, mental health was right at the top of the list.
Yeah.
So, I said to John, we need to not wait till after this event. We need to help people now build up their personal resilience now. And it's a skill you can learn. It's something that you practice and you get better at. Prevention needs to be where the focus is, not us trying to deal with the cure, in 3 or 6 months' time. There will be some people that, no matter what we do, are going to always need help later down the line who didn't handle the situation well.
Yeah.
But I couldn't honestly see that there could be any human being, within the UK in the situation we were in, who wouldn't be impacted in some way, shape or form. And so I'll be honest, and I've said to my team that I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I absolutely stepped back into how I was in the ambulance service and went into life-saving mode. And I was absolutely back in that emergency service command and control situation. We need to get hold of this situation. We need to control this situation. We need to be clear on our messaging. And we need to absolutely start doing something now for our people. And, I brought on board an expert, Simon Richardson from Golden Tree. I was very fussy in who I chose because I wanted them to be in the same mindset and thoughts around the approach as I am.
Yeah.
We've done huge amounts of awareness of mental health in the organisation, trained over 250 people this year. We're training every one of our drivers in it, 1,500 people starting now, so over the course of the next year. And, trying to get down to our grassroots people, because mental health isn't about managers being aware and trying to manage it and support people. Yes, they've got some lines of responsibility around that, the general well-being of their people, but they're not mental health experts. What you've got to do is create a culture where people are, feel okay to say, do you know what, I'm not having a great day.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Peers be able to support peers. And so we've done lots of training, but it's like you say, there's lots of areas of mental health. So we've looked at, I've had a webinar every week. So I've done 30 now. And they've been on areas such as stress, one on anxiety, one on mental health awareness, but also last week was on the specific area of post-traumatic stress disorder, because people think it only can happen to people in the armed forces or emergency services, and it can happen to any of us who have a situation occur in our lives, work or at home, that can lead to that. So, and lots of work on emotional intelligence, emotional resilience, and personal resilience, to just understand, what is happening with me, and having that self-awareness to think, do you know what, I'm letting myself get a bit overtired, I'm really not eating well, and I can feel that I'm getting frustrated and irritable with my colleagues, and perhaps, I don't want to be that way, to then be able to have that environment where you reach out and say, oh, we went on that training, I know I'm being irritable, I'm not feeling good at the moment.
Yeah. So what does that training look like? Is it a variety in terms of, you mentioned webinar, is there also like, discussions between people? Is it that individual you mentioned, teaching people techniques?
Yeah, we've got formal training, accredited training, which Simon delivers, first aid for mental health awareness. Previously, it was a day program, face-to-face, but he converted that to online for the pandemic, and he hadn't delivered training online before, but he did a great job of it. So he uses us as a bit of a trial base. And that is a sort of 3-hour session with a follow-up hours individual session with Simon, to affirm that they have learned, and they have developed the techniques that they need with regards to mental health awareness. So that's been very positive. Also, just coming back to different people need different things. So yeah, we've put on a webinar every week that I've hosted with various experts. But also, where we've had a lot of engagement on particular webinars, we've then also put clinics on for smaller groups of people. So we had clinics around sleep and stress, where people could join us in teams, sort of 12, 15 at the most, and just have a safe space to offload.
So it's a two-way conversation.
With our expert there. I've been very keen throughout, really, that people turn their cameras on. And it wasn't very popular when I was saying this right at the beginning in Suez. People didn't want to turn their cameras on in Teams meeting. But people, and this is the, sort of the social science doctor in me, people need human interaction. And sometimes they don't know it. So it's a bit of tough love, if you know what I mean. And I think that has been really beneficial. The fact that we've had Microsoft Teams and other platforms, and that we've not been relying on conference calls, has contributed significantly to helping our people, whether they realise it or not.
I think it's about being polite in that instance as well, isn't it? Because I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, like, I don't want to be on camera. I've been on, calls all day, every day this week. I just want to be off camera. But if you're polite about it and give notice, the same way that you might do, you might say, I can't make this meeting because I've got some stuff going on, but I can dial into it. That for me is the same concept. But I don't think you should just rock up and suddenly be like, no, I'm off camera, because you don't feel engaged in the session.
Yeah.
I was thinking, do you remember the days when you used to have that little kind of spider-shaped phone in the desk, and you would be typing the number in, and everyone's kind of huddled around it trying to have a conversation,
and then moving it across the table so Matt can talk.
Let me move it a bit closer. Like, oh god,
no, I can't hear you. Can't
grim, absolutely grim. Tracey, like I think the the mental health topic is such a big topic for us to talk about, and as you know, like Jack and I are very, very passionate about it. You know, we're both trained mental health first aiders, and I talk quite openly about my experiences with kind of mental ill health and sharing kind of tips and tricks and videos and stuff online as well. So you know, I could probably talk about this for about another hour at least, but I think a lot of companies now are clearly they are auditing what they do, and they're trying to understand what is it we do well, what don't we do so well, and what do we need to improve on. I think a lot of that comes back to future proofing, right? Because a lot of people are reacting right now because they have to, because they're in crisis, and you know they need to be able to respond quickly. And you know, to your point, Tracey, right? It's almost kind of getting in that you know, kind of role of command, and you know, kind of dealing with the kind of immediate situation at hand. But like, what is it companies can do, you know, to kind of shift the balance, not just between, you know, dealing with the immediate crisis right now, but thinking about what is it they can do to really kind of future-proof those well-being strategies that they've got to ensure that they are, you know, kind of sustainable and continue to deliver.
So a couple of things, you know, when I say command and control, it's not about being bossy or dictating. If you look at the book by Professor John Seddon, Freedom from Command and Control, it's very old, but it's got good principles in it. It's about actually just having structure around what you're doing, structure and discipline around what you're doing. So let's just make that clear.
I believe you.
The second thing is, I think, where organisations who perhaps haven't got a very good or developed business continuity capability, because perhaps they've never needed it, or perhaps they're not in an environment that's needed it, like an emergency service, for instance. There's a tendency when something happens to react and all the effort go on to just dealing with that situation right now and in that moment. But actually, you know, 9 years in an ambulance service, doing lots of business continuity planning, imagining all kinds of horrible and terrible things that might happen. Is that you know that when you step into the command and control structure to deal with those situations, you split it into two straight away. One arm is dealing with the situation. The other arm of it is dealing immediately with business recovery and the future. And you have to run those two things in parallel. And it can be hard because everyone wants to jump into the crisis bit. You've got to be disciplined and say, well, no, you're focusing from the immediate situation on our business recovery and the future, and you know, and keeping the wheels going round on the bus while we deal with this situation. And it just sort of naturally happened really at Suez. Myself and John were sort of leading on the structure of managing the crisis, and I am now responsible for crisis management at board level. It was our health and safety function that led on it as a group and at BU level. And our director of operations, you know, the three of us, you know, really sort of managing the crisis. And then our sort of chief finance officer and chief development officer, you know, keeping a line of sight on the future. And we put together a project team right at the beginning, looking at, well, what we're going to learn from this and what's our future going to be looking like. And so, you know, we pull some people out of their day jobs to do that from really quite early on.
That's got to be quite a difficult dynamic, because to your point, everyone just wants to jump in to fix the problem, don't they? But again, I guess it kind of comes back to the slow down to speed up, you know, anecdote that we had earlier, where it's like, clearly we need to deal with this, and you know, we'll do that, but we have to be able to also just think about what we're doing, you know, in the future impacts and how sustainable it is, and kind of what we want out of the overall strategy, right? So I again, we've covered so much on this episode. It has been absolutely incredible, and 90 minutes has just flown by.
I wish we could have another 90.
Yeah, I was like, I've still got like 50 odd questions that I wrote down. But honestly, Tracey, I find you fascinating to listen to. I really, really do.
So brilliant.
I love your insights. I love your, the way that you can kind of talk about your experiences, and I think, there's been some really, really genuinely valuable advice and kind of knowledge that we've captured on this show. So thank you so much. People listening to this might naturally want to kind of have questions, or might be interested in speaking to you. What's the best way for people to kind of connect in with you or network with you?
Yeah, so I love networking. I spend probably too much time on LinkedIn and Twitter, but drop me a message through LinkedIn. I love talking to people, and I do arrange to. Nowadays, it's so great, isn't it? We can just say, let's have a virtual coffee on MS Teams, and have half an hour with a complete stranger and just conversation. And that's so good because we're each giving each other something. I've certainly, through my networks and engaging with them throughout the pandemic, I'll be honest, I have stole some ideas with pride. But I'd like to think that I've given some ideas and given back a little bit as well. So, please don't hesitate if you want to reach out and connect with me. I'd love you to do that.
Amazing. So as I say, we have reached time. So we've got a question that we ask all of our guests. And it came about because we found that a lot of people we're speaking to didn't naturally kind of always head to HR. They just kind of found themselves within that type of profession. And so one of the things we're quite interested to know is, if you weren't in HR and you weren't doing your role as a CHRO right now, what other role do you think you would be working in right now?
Oh, wow, that is a tough question, that, certainly because I'm in such a happy place, and I think it's probably has been.
Well, if you started again, so if you were,
I'd probably be in communications. I love it. I've had responsibility for communications before, and again, it's quite about connecting with people psychologically. So totally. I'd probably be in communications, I think.
Brilliant.
I think you'd be a master at it. But no, Tracey, honestly, thank you so much. It's been really, really great to have you on the show. I hope that next time we can do it in person and grab a beer as well. But
definitely got to be a gin in it next time.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way to my heart is definitely through a gin and tonic. But no, Tracey, thank you so much, and it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. And we'll speak again very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracey.
Thank you.